Today we're hunting down filming locations for an episode of CHiPs that a lot of you have been asking me to cover. It guest stars Danny Bonaduce, and it's the first of 2 episodes that he makes an appearance on. I'm talking about Season 4, Episode 16, also known as...
Karate! It's karate in karate.
Let's go see what we can find. The episode begins with Danny Bonaduce and his friends stealing motorcycles from Yamaha, which used to be located right here in this building at 2531 South Main Street in Los Angeles. A lot has changed here on this building, at least that lamppost is still the same. Ponch and John are cruising down Maple Avenue and passing Adams Boulevard when they get the call about the motorcycles being stolen. Now, something that's pretty cool that I noticed is this building appears that it was just being built during the filming of this episode. The motorcycles then come out of a service door that used to be right here. This side of the building has changed a lot, although you can still see where those windows used to be. They then make a right and head down the street, passing by this building, and head right towards that bank on the corner, which is still a bank, just a different bank. A few moments later, Ponch and John come around the corner, and this building across the street hasn't changed much. But so Ponch and John spot the motorcycles speeding away, and the chase is on. They're chasing the motorcycles through this residential area towards these apartments. And now John is in a completely different area. Notice that church at the end of the street that kind of looks like a castle, and the bridge right next to it? Well, the church that looks like a castle is still there, but the bridge is now gone, which is kind of weird because if you look at Google Maps, it was supposedly there just a year ago. I was pretty excited to ride my bike over this bridge for the video, but, well, maybe that wouldn't have been such a good idea. The area where they come off the bridge on the other side is now a private road that's part of a car dealership, and it looks a bit different. But right over there is where the bridge began, and then it crosses over the freeway and comes to an end right here. And then this is the building that you see directly in front of them when they're coming off of the bridge. You can see where they covered up all the windows and then added another story to the building. They're now passing by 1815 Flower Street, which isn't too close to where they just were, but we'll be going back to this location in a bit. And they're now back in the area of where they just came off the bridge on Figueroa, headed towards Washington Boulevard. Now that building on the corner has changed a lot since they filmed this episode, but the building right next to it with the sign sticking out was still there on Google Maps, but when I showed up to film, it appeared that the building had just been torn down recently. But thanks to this lamppost, we're able to tell that right here is where that 65 Impala was parked. And this is also about the same spot where Ponch turns around and starts heading the other way down Figueroa. John continues chasing the motorcycle across Adams Boulevard over the 110 freeway, headed right towards Figueroa, going right back to where they just were. And as the motorcycle heads through the intersection of Wall Street and 23rd, it finally wipes out right here. This is the very area where Danny Bonaduce, aka Billy, loses control of his motorcycle. Now, a few moments later, John comes rolling up, and you see this building right behind him, which still looks the same, it's just no longer a dance club. And after a couple of idle threats from Billy, John is able to safely place him under arrest, and you can see all of these buildings behind him, which still pretty much look the same. So when Ponch loses the other guy on the motorcycle, he stops and pays a visit to his old buddy Rivas to see if maybe he can help out. This right here behind me is the parking lot that Rivas worked at. It's now a private parking lot, but a lot of the stuff here still matches up, but I'm not going to be able to get all the same angles because the parking lot is now closed to the public. Now right here is the driveway that Ponch pulls into, and then right here would have been the parking lot attendant booth where Rivas hangs out at. And right about here is where the motorcycles were parked, and you can tell by looking across the street These are the buildings that you see in the background behind the motorcycles. And then right over there against that brick wall is where the car was parked, where Rivas is hiding out his girlfriend, the motorcycle thief. And she gets out of the car and then she sneaks off that way. At the intersection of Washington Boulevard and Hoover Street, where this AutoZone now is, back in 1981, this was a car wash. You can see that self-storage building behind it is still there. And just next to the AutoZone, on the corner where this McDonald's now is, this was Mario's Super Taco. And behind Mario's was the hangout for the karate gang. So this is it. This would have been the backside of Mario's Super Tacos. And one way that I was able to figure out this location is when Teri moves her head, right behind her you can see a sign for the 10 East. And if we come on the other side of this McDonald's, there's that sign. And when Andy's car is pulling into the parking lot, behind him you can see a couple of buildings now blocked by this AutoZone. But if we go over here on the other side of AutoZone, here's the buildings you see, and you can still see the steeple of that church peeking up over the buildings off in the distance. And then Andy's car would have pulled right over here and parked next to the sign for Mario's Super Tacos. And across the street, you can see a sign sticking up above the building that has a star on top of it. And I recognize that as the sign for Lucy's Drive-In, which used to be located directly across the street. Lucy's is now next door, but for many years it was right here on the corner. And we're gonna be talking more about this location later on at the end of this video. So Ponch and John head back to the parking lot to talk to Rivas, but Rivas isn't there. So they end up talking to his boss and probably end up causing Rivas some trouble in the near future. So Ponch and John just can't seem to leave Rivas alone, and they go to pay him a visit at the place where he volunteers, the Oak Street Youth Center. And that was this building right here behind me. The building is now an event space called Vertigo, located at 1828 Oak Street in Los Angeles. And while they're there visiting Rivas, they also see the other motorcycle thief, but don't realize it. But that's okay, John's got his eye on her. John? All right. Well, that's not the only person they spot. Look who else walked in. It's Billy, and he wants to give them a lesson in Kung Fu.
It's karate.
All right, gotcha. Karate. So Ponch and John are walking down the sidewalk away from the youth center, and when they get down to the end of the building, Ponch notices somebody trying to break into his car. He yells out to him, and the chase is on. As Ponch and John speed after the crooks, they pass through the intersection of Maple Avenue and 23rd Street and pass right by a motorcycle cop who takes off after them for speeding. That motorcycle cop was parked right here in front of this market, and unbelievably, almost nothing has changed on this market in the last 40 years. That motorcycle cop was parked right here. He then rounds the corner making a right and heads down the street this way. Okay, so this location is a bit tricky. When they're coming down the street and the motorcycle officer is behind them, you can see them passing by the old Holtzman office furniture building, and then you see some addresses on some other buildings that tell us that they're on 15th Street near Figueroa. And that would put us right about here, where the LA Convention Center now is. So they kept adding on to the convention center, and eventually they had to demolish everything that was on 15th Street. Right over here is 15th Drive, and that would put 15th Street somewhere right about here. Now the house that they stop in front of when they get pulled over actually still exists. So when they were getting ready to demolish everything on 15th Street, somebody picked this house up and moved it to its current location at 826 South Coronado Street in Los Angeles. And I promise you, the house really is there behind these trees. Actually, if you look at Google Maps, you get a clear shot of the house, and that picture was supposedly taken just about a year ago. But so this is not the same location, but this is the same house that Ponch and John stand in front of, arguing with the officer who's trying to give them a ticket. Now what makes this even more of a bummer about 15th Street no longer existing at Figueroa is not only is this where they get pulled over, but also right next to that spot was the restaurant where Andy Macedon hangs out. So once again, Billy and his friends are up to no good. They spot a car that they like and they go to work on it. And you can tell exactly where that car was parked based on these trees that are still here that lean slightly to the left. Luckily, Bear's coming down the street and spots the shenanigans. Now right here is where Bear was coming down the street. This is at Lorenzo Drive and Lorenzo Place in Los Angeles. Bear creeps up a little bit further and stops his cruiser in the middle of the intersection. He's watching them strip the car while he calls it in, and then he makes his move. So Bear is heading down the street this way in his cruiser, and the van would have been parked roughly right about where that sign is for the curve. And then Bear stops his cruiser and jumps out, and you can tell exactly where that was by this sign with the arrow pointing in the other direction. His cruiser would have been parked right in front of this sign. And so that means right over here in between the cruiser and the van, this is where Bear and Billy have that big fight. And notice this, I think it's like a drainage ditch. This can be seen multiple times throughout that fight, and it looks really similar to how it did, except for I think it used to have 2 holes and now it has 1, but everything around it is still the same. And you can also tell where Bear was dancing around by that yellow sign and that storm drain. It's a little hard to see now because the curb's been painted red. But so Bear's getting his butt kicked, and he decides that it's time to pull his gun, and even Billy's shocked because this is one of just a few times that a gun has been pulled on CHiPs. And once again, you can see that storm drain behind Bear's head as he sits in the street feeling bad for pulling his gun, even though they literally just tried to run him over with the van. So I think it was justified. So I gotta say, this is one of those locations that was just so awesome to see in person, because when I got here and started looking around and noticed that not very much had changed, I was able to just stand here and picture the karate fight going on between Billy and Bear. It's just so awesome. I love locations like this. So the CHP decides to throw a party at the youth center, because I guess they have nothing else better to do. And just as the party's about to get started, we see Andy Macedon come around the corner and pull up in front of the youth center. Unfortunately, that cool-looking market across the street is no longer there. Ponch and John are out patrolling when they spot the van that tried to run over Bear. And now they're in a completely different area. But so they turn around and the chase is on. So the van's now coming down this street, and believe it or not, the camera is stationed pretty much where I'm standing, but the buildings that you see the van driving next to are actually way down that street. You can't even see them from here. It's these 2 buildings that the van is driving next to. And then as the van gets a little closer to the end of the street, you see these 2 buildings, which also look a lot closer than they actually are. And the van then ends up flipping over in a field, which used to be located right here where this newer apartment complex is. And when the van flips over, you can see a factory across the street, which is now a school. And it's kind of funny that right here is where the van crashes, because right next door, it looks like someone just crashed into this motel. And luckily, there was this wall here to stop the car from actually going into the motel, because this can also be seen in this episode. When they're getting out of the van and they're about to run away, you can see the side of this motel. And then when Ponch and John pull up on their motorcycles, you can see these buildings behind them. The CHP is throwing yet another party at the Oak Street Youth Center. This time they've even got Gertrude serving drinks while Ponch is teaching karate.
It's karate.
There's also a gymnastics demonstration going on. Thankfully, John isn't around. Oh, never mind. So things are going good, everyone's having a great time, but while Ponch is doing his demonstration, Andy shows up. Andy! He challenges Ponch to a fight, but of course Ponch doesn't accept, and then all the kids lose faith in him and start to leave the youth center. It was right about here where the minor fender bender happens that the boss of the parking lot uses as an excuse to fire Rivas, but we know why he was really firing him. It was right here where Teri was walking into the youth center when she runs into Rivas and he tells her that he's now working for Andy Macedon. Now you think she would be excited about this because she's been bugging Rivas to come work for Andy, but now she's too good for that and she tells Rivas she'll smell him later. Whew, he just can't win. Ponch shows up to the youth center and sees that there's no one around. He talks to Teri and finds out that Rivas is now working for Macedon. He now has to do something about it. So he heads down to the hangout. And this is it right here in the parking lot of this McDonald's is where Ponch and Andy Macedon have their big karate match, the finale for this episode. So everyone was just standing around right here in this parking lot watching the big fight between Andy and Ponch. Even John shows up with his date. And of course, Ponch ends up beating Andy, and then a few members of the karate gang say that they'll actually testify against Andy. Rats. Now, the way that I was really able to pinpoint this location is when Ponch is walking away, if you look behind him across the street, you can actually see Lucy's Drive-In. You can see the sign right there that says Lucy's and a sign that says Fish and Chips. Again, that would have been located right here on the corner. And here's an old picture of Lucy's when it used to be located on the corner, and you can see it matches up exactly with what we see in the show. All right, well, that's gonna do it for this video. I'm so happy that I was able to find as many locations as I did. I didn't think I'd be able to find that many. I think for our next Chips video, I might just have to do the second Danny Bonaduce episode. I mean, it only makes sense. All right, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.